The NATO military alliance celebrating the 75th anniversary of its founding today. NATO was created back in 1949 in the aftermath of the Second World War and as the Cold War was beginning. Its mission was to bring together countries in Europe, led by the United States, to help contain the Soviet Union and bring post-Nazi Germany into the Western fold. Canada, of course, has been a member ever since, too. This was the scene in Brussels, Belgium, where NATO has its headquarters, a cake-cutting ceremony. A celebration attended by top diplomats from NATO member countries, including Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister. NATO started with only 12 members, but has since grown to 32, including the recent additions of Finland and Sweden, and has recently retaken really a central role in world affairs following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Speaking of which, Ukraine is urging NATO for more military assistance and quickly to fight back against the Russians, who now seem to have the advantage again militarily. Let's bring in retired Lieutenant General the Honourable Andrew Leslie. He's a former commander of Canada's Army, Chief Government Whip, and former Liberal MP. Good to see you. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Todd.
Your thoughts on this anniversary?
75 years of hard work. NATO was originally conceived, as you mentioned, to keep Russia out of the rest of Europe, apart from that which it had already occupied, to keep France in an alliance structure, and to keep Germany peaceful.
And the fact that it's still around 75 years later says what?
It says that there's a need, perhaps more so now than ever before, and there's a good argument to be made that NATO has never in its history faced dangers as extreme as that which we see right now.
I remember, 5 years ago or so, there was this discussion as to whether NATO was even relevant anymore. And now all of a sudden we're seeing just how relevant it actually is, really taking, a leadership role in the conflict in Ukraine.
It has. It stepped up to the task at hand in a remarkable fashion. A bit of initial hesitation, which is why Russia was able to penetrate so deeply inside Ukraine, despite the bravery of the Ukrainian troops. But NATO has certainly proven its worth. Witness the 32 members, up from a much fewer number than that during its foundational year.
How big of a role has Canada played, General Leslie, in NATO and where it stands now?
Well, NATO's done extraordinarily well since Russia's attack. We have not, quite frankly. We are a wealthy nation. We have $2 trillion economy, 41 million people, and we seem to be really good at promising stuff that never actually happens. Or if it does happen, it happens in small increments, to the extent where just about every NATO ally is extraordinarily irritated with Canada for not having spent or planned even to get to 2% of GDP.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the benchmark is 2% at least. Now some NATO countries are saying that number should actually be higher than 2%, and Canada continues to be a laggard. How embarrassing, frankly, is that for our country?
It's horribly so, as is the state of our armed forces, which our allies are well aware of. Perhaps more importantly, so are our potential enemies. NATO is a vital international institution for Canada because we benefited from having the alliance structure around us so that we could focus on domestic programs, with the understanding that should our allies run into trouble, we'd be there to help. We're not there to help now because there hasn't been a single significant piece of combat capability purchased by the Liberal government in 9 years.
We know that Sweden and Finland recently joined, so now there are 32 members. There's obviously ongoing conversations about Ukraine. What do you think?
The frontline nations, as they're now calling themselves, Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, are dedicating an extraordinary amount of energy into their defense capability to, A, provide credible deterrence to Russia deciding to continue the attack should tragically, unfortunately, and we all hope it won't, win in Ukraine. Not sure what wins look like with the bravery of the Ukrainian soldiers, but it's a possibility, and they're frightened, and frightened leaders pay attention to threats to their citizens. And Canada lives in a bubble. We're extraordinarily focused on social programs, and we are remiss in our international obligations and duties.
General Leslie, how worried are you about the possibility of Donald Trump returning to the White House and perhaps pulling the United States out of NATO?
Well, I met President Trump when I accompanied the Prime Minister for the first visit down in Washington, now quite some time ago. He has repeatedly stated on both national and international TV that if nations don't meet the 2% spend on defense, 2% of GDP, then Russia, quote, can do whatever they want with them. The great danger of a personality such as Mr. Trump's is that you never know when he's serious and when he'll dig in his heels and actually ruthlessly try to implement it. If he says it often enough, we should be paying a lot of attention. But it's not only Mr. Trump. It's the intelligentsia, it's the leaders, both military and political, down in the United States are quite frankly fed up with Canada and our lack of defense spending and for not taking security seriously. And the United States does many things, but I'll tell you one thing they do well, and they take it extraordinarily security, is defense and security writ large. And we're not doing the same kind of stuff they expect from their friend and neighbor.
One final point, General Leslie, as you well know, your grandfather, Brooke Claxton, was Canada's longest serving defense minister and was there when NATO was formed. I'm curious what you think he might think of where NATO is at 75 years later.
Todd, you've got an impeccable research team. Well done. I think he'd be disappointed. I think he'd be delighted with NATO. I think he would have a great deal of pride in Canada and its possibilities. Enormous landmass, wealth, great citizen, hardworking folk, credible technologies. But we've been living in a bubble, and quite frankly, the federal leadership on the defense and security file, not only for Canada, but our contributions internationally are sorely lacking. And like I say, he'd be extraordinarily disappointed with where we are now because we have to get ready and we have to deter what may happen next.
Yeah, I know about your grandfather. We actually went to the same high school, so there were plaques about him all over the place when I went there many years after. Yeah, small world. Thank you thank you so much for this. It's always a pleasure. We appreciate you taking the time coming on CTV.
That's all I said. Thank you.